We are witnessing what is perhaps the single most stunning geopolitical development of Donald Trump's entire presidency, and that's saying something. NATO, the most powerful military alliance in the history of the world, looks like it's finished. For 77 years, it's been the bedrock of the Western order. For 77 years, America has poured its blood and treasure into holding it together, and today, the President of the United States looked that alliance dead in the eye, and he said, "You're cowards, you're unreliable, and we, the United States, have had enough. Wait until you see this." Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your patron professor, enjoying yet another glorious day in Trump's golden age that you made possible back in November 2024. So if you want a front row seat on how you continue to change the world in ways you never even imagined, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. In an interview published today by Britain's The Telegraph, President Trump was asked directly whether he would reconsider U.S. membership in NATO after the Iran conflict. And his answer did not mince words. Quote, "Oh, yes, I would say it's beyond reconsideration. I was never swayed by NATO. I always knew they were a paper tiger. And Putin knows that too, by the way." And then just hours later, in a separate Reuters interview, Trump doubled down, saying that he is, quote, "absolutely, without question, weighing withdrawal from the most powerful military alliance in human history." This is, it's absolutely stunning stuff. And of course, if you've been following this channel, you'll know that this did not come out of nowhere. When the United States and Israel launched Operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion against Iran back on February 28th, Trump fully expected NATO's European allies, most especially the UK and France, to back the effort. At a minimum, he expected them to at least allow U.S. forces to use their military bases to conduct the campaign. You know, military bases that we built, military bases that we paid for. U.S. taxpayers are responsible for over 60% of NATO expenditures. But in a shockingly brazen rebuke, those European leaders refused. The worst, of course, was the far leftist socialist government in Spain. They closed their airspace to U.S. military aircraft. Now, keep in mind, they didn't just close their bases. They closed their airspace. Spain's socialist officials called the conflict with Iran, quote, "deeply illegal and profoundly unjust." Deeply illegal and profoundly unjust, like when they were bashing the heads in of the Catalan separatists a few years back, right? I'm just curious, where are they getting that from? What transcendent law are they appealing? What law court are they appealing to? The UN? The EU? And what transcendent standard of justice are these socialist clowns appealing to? They're living in a world that doesn't exist anymore. Again, for right or for wrong. They're still trapped in a liberal international order that's gone the way of the dodo bird. But unfortunately, even so-called NATO allies that recognize that world has passed away, fellow nationalist populists, ended up disappointing us as well. You may have heard that Reuters is reporting that Italy, Giorgia Meloni's Italy, just denied the United States permission to land its military aircraft in an airbase in Sicily on its way to the Middle East. France followed suit, of course, Belgium. And then when America called on its NATO allies to join the effort to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows, they refused again. And so Trump's verdict was blunt and devastating. They weren't there for us, and if they're not there for us, then this isn't an alliance. And it wasn't just President Trump. Stunningly, one of the biggest defenders of NATO, the fellow who co-authored the Senate law several years back preventing us from leaving NATO, he's now singing a very different tune.
If now we have reached a point where the NATO alliance means that we can't use those bases, that in fact, that we can no longer use those bases to defend America's interests, then NATO is a one-way street. then NATO is simply about us having troops in Europe to defend Europe. But when we need their help, not their help, we're not asking them to conduct airstrikes. When we need them to allow us to use their military bases, their answer is no. Then why are we in NATO? You have to ask that question. Why do we have billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, over the years, trillions of dollars, and all these American forces stationed in the region? If we can only use, in our time of need, we're not going to be allowed to use those bases. So I think there's no doubt, unfortunately, after this conflict is concluded, we are going to have to re-examine that relationship. We're going to have to re-examine the value of NATO and that alliance for our country. Ultimately, that's a decision for the president to make, and he'll have to make it. We're going to finish the job here. As I said, we're very, very close to achieving our objectives on all of these things that I've outlined. But I do think, unfortunately, we are going to have to re-examine whether or not this alliance that has served this country well for a while is still serving that purpose, or is it now become a one-way street where America is simply in a position to defend Europe, but when we need the help of our allies, they're going to deny us basing rights and they're going to deny us overflight? I think these are very legitimate questions that we need to be asking, and this are going to have to be very carefully examined after this conflict is over.
All right, so let me break that down for you. That was a very careful diplomatic way of saying that these weak, cowardly European leaders just shattered NATO. These feckless so-called leaders just shattered NATO. For nearly 80 years after Europe bombed itself to smithereens with the Second World War within 2 decades, the United States has underwritten European security. We poured trillions of dollars into an alliance that was supposed to be built on mutual defense and mutual commitment. That's what makes this thing an alliance. Mutuality, mutual defense, mutual commitment. And the moment America needed backup, the moment America was prosecuting a war against the single most destabilizing terror-sponsoring regime on the planet that was threatening the regional choke point from which Europe gets an increasing amount of its oil, thanks to their going full Greta Thunberg, they're going full Greta Green over the last 10 years. These so-called NATO allies have the gall to not just look the other way. That would have been bad enough. But to actually shut the door in our faces. I think Trump's message is unmistakable. That era of the United States underwriting European security to the tune of trillions of dollars, that era is over. Gang, we're living through what can only be described as a historic turning point, a moment future generations will look back on and say, that's when everything changed. Right now, as President Trump leads what many see as a bold and decisive effort to confront the Iranian regime and dismantle its destabilizing influence across the globe, there's another battle unfolding, quieter, more subtle, but no less consequential, and it's happening right here at home. While strength is being projected abroad, something far more insidious is brewing domestically, because as momentum builds, so does desperation. Those entrenched forces who've long benefited from the old order, they see the writing on the wall. They see a resurgence of national confidence, of economic independence, of a people reclaiming control over their future. And they're not going to sit back and let that happen without a fight. So what do? Well, they shift the battlefield. Instead of confronting strength head on, they create instability where you're most vulnerable. Your finances, your savings, your family's future. The real danger isn't just geopolitical. It's economic, it's systemic, and it's deeply personal. We're stepping into what I call the patriot economy, a new era where Americans are taking back control, not just culturally, but financially, where faith, family, and freedom aren't just ideals, they're the foundation of a new economic reality. And that means you have a choice to make. Do you wait and hope for the best, or do you take action right now to secure your family's future? This is where strategic moves matter. More and more Americans are turning to alternative financial systems, ones that operate outside the reach of centralized control. Cryptocurrency, when approached wisely, has become a powerful tool in that shift, not as speculation, but as protection, as sovereignty. And platforms like Block Trust IRA are positioning themselves right at the center of this transformation. Their Animus AI system is designed to help everyday investors navigate volatility with precision, working around the clock to identify opportunities and manage risk in a rapidly changing financial landscape. This isn't about guesswork. It's about strategy. Even more, they're offering institutional-grade security measures designed to protect your assets in a way traditional systems increasingly can't guarantee. And right now, they're offering a $2,500 bonus for those ready to take that first step, to begin building what we might call your family finance defense. Head on over to turleytalkscrypto.com and schedule a confidential conversation with their team. You will not be disappointed. Back in his first term, Trump called NATO, quote, obsolete. Not because he necessarily wanted to destroy it, but because he wanted to fix it. And he had three specific complaints. First and foremost, the alliance was designed to fight a Soviet Union that no longer existed. So there was a certain sense it was obsolescent. Second, it wasn't adapting to modern threats. And third, most member states were blatantly freeloading on American defense spending. So Trump took this opportunity of this war in the Middle East to look at NATO and basically say, all right, prove me wrong. Here's your moment. Show me you're relevant to the world as it actually exists today. And instead of proving Trump wrong, NATO handed him exactly the ammunition he needed to justifiably collapse the transatlantic alliance. Check this out.
I think NATO's making a very foolish mistake. And I've long said that, I wonder whether or not NATO would ever be there for us. So this was a great test, because we don't need them, but they should have been there. The other thing is, and I think, very important, we didn't have to be there for Ukraine. Biden chose to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on Ukraine. And I guess the head of Germany just made a statement that, they weren't involved and they have nothing to do with the war. But at the same time, they think we did a great thing by knocking them out. Nobody wants to have Iran, or anybody, but nobody wants to have Iran with a nuclear, because these people are crazy. They're absolutely crazy.
President Trump warned that NATO was facing what he called a very bad future if allies failed to respond. That wasn't a threat. It was a verdict, okay? We've always wanted to see if NATO came to our aid the way we've been coming to theirs. And in effect, they answered that question loud and clear. And so Trump just sees NATO as a Cold War relic. It was built to confront a Soviet Union that simply no longer exists. It takes American money, takes American troops, takes American blood. It takes American treasure. And when the bill came due, when America called in the favor, the alliance went silent. Again, it wasn't just silence. They slammed the door in our faces. Now, as to why, many analysts are noting that a significant segment of European society experiences a growing resentment towards the United States. And it's driven by a number of factors, but particularly by frustrations over economic pressure, foreign policy, political polarization. Studies show that only about 16% of EU citizens view the United States as a trusted ally. I want that to hit you. 16% of EU citizens view the nation that has poured $1 trillion into their security architecture as a trusted ally. And the key factors fueling that is the fear of U.S. military adventurism. So Europeans, by and large, see both the United States and Israel as catalysts for an increasingly unstable world. So they see our propensity towards militarism as genuinely detrimental to world peace. Now, besides the fact that the liberal international order doesn't exist anymore, besides the fact that we're not interested in being a crusader nation and spreading liberal democracy far and wide, the end of history, unipolar nonsense, and so forth, besides all of that, Europeans have to look at themselves. And they have to look at themselves and what they have become over these last several decades. What they've lost. They've become a very placid, lethargic, open border, globalist, massive, bureaucratic welfare state that shares more in common with Greta Thunberg than they do with Donald Trump. Now, of course, there's the growing populist right movements that we've been tracking these last 10 years throughout the continent. But even Giorgia Meloni of Italy played this anti-U.S. card in denying U.S. military aircraft to land in their base in Sicily. So, in other words, it appears that Europe, whether globalist or populist, is indeed increasingly embracing its own identity, its own unique place and position in this world. And they're pretty much telling America, yeah, it's time you took a hike. Which, of course, given Trump's natural derision for NATO, calling it obsolete, looks like it's a rejection that's about to be gladly reciprocated. So we'll certainly see how this plays out. But clearly, Trump's Golden Age doctrine is becoming crystal clear to the entire world. America will no longer be the automatic defender of allies who refuse to defend American interests in return. This is not a bluff. This is not a negotiating tactic. This is a president who's decided that 77 years of being taken for granted by a paper tiger is enough. And the world had better start paying attention.